record to this computer for the call for those members who may not be able to join us. I'm Lieutenant Commander Teresa Carpenter. I'm the prior Public Affairs Officer for the Sea Services Leadership Association, and I'm also the Joint Women's Leadership Symposium co-chair, and was also the co-chair of the virtual series last year. So thank you all for joining us today to discuss toxic leadership. It's a subject that is near and dear to my heart and to many others. I don't think there is a person who hasn't been affected by this issue in one way or another. And in fact, it was the most popular webinar that we did during the virtual series with Admiral Jan Hamby, and where she presented her research on this issue. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask Candace just a few questions to kind of kick this off. And then what I'd like to do is we're going to open it up to the audience. What we want to do is make sure that you have the opportunity to ask some questions. And we really just want to know if you've worked in we want to first start off wondering, have you worked in a hostile work environment, or have you worked with a toxic leader? So for those of you joining us, use the chat box. We kind of want to just get an idea. Is it a toxic work environment or a toxic leader that you've worked with in the past? All right, we got Julie, who said toxic leader. And a lot of times it's a combination of both. But I think that the way that we wanted to structure this is sort of, why did we choose this particular movie? So I'll turn this over to Candace to explain and to draw this out a little bit more. But we understood that it wasn't really about sexual harassment, although it could be. But what we wanted to show was sort of all the different things that are sort of not seen that leads up to that environment. And so with that, Candace, I'll turn that over to you also to kind of tease that out a little bit more.
Sure. Thank you, Teresa. So this is kind of a weird format just because we can't see each other per se, but hopefully you guys can use the chat box so I can get some input. Teresa and I can get some input from you guys so that we can steer, since it is a smaller group, steer the conversation in a way that's most beneficial. I think the first order of business, I guess you could say, is defining a toxic leader or a toxic work environment. Because in order to react to or try to solve a problem, you have to first identify it. So I know we have at least 2 people that brought up toxic leader and or work environment. So what were, just if you can, throw out some buzzwords, like what are the first things that pop into your head when you think of toxic leader or toxic work environment?
And feel free to come on camera if you'd like, or to speak up. This is a free flow discussion. There's only about 5 to 10 of us. And we want this to be a free flow, but we also understand either way if you're not comfortable doing that as well, because we understand that this is a very sensitive issue for many. So either way, we're going to have this conversation, but as much as you feel comfortable participating, please do so. So what I will do in lieu of that, if people aren't asking questions, or if there hasn't been anybody spoken up, I'm just going to start asking you some of the series of questions that, inspired us as we were watching the movie, and sort of why we chose this to be the representative movie. And I think one of the things that we want to talk about first is there's only so much you can control when you're faced with a toxic leader. There's only so many things on your side that you have control over. And so as you watched the movie, Candace, what did you notice that were some of the actions Jane could have taken, and then actions that she didn't take as you were watching the movie?
Yeah, so obviously in the movie, the assistant, it's a pretty extreme example of the behavior of the leader. So the boss in this movie, who we would compare to, say, your CO or your OIC. Hopefully we don't see any service members, bringing young girls in their office to exchange sexual favors for,
right,
movie roles. But you can extrapolate that down to something more minor. or not as maybe offensive, but it can still build. So I think one of the things is, we're not trying to create a victimhood or a hero complex in any of these persons. So please don't think that we're trying to say like, this person's the good guy, this person's the bad guy, or this person's the victim, this person's the villain. Because at the end of the day, everyone is accountable for their actions, and we're not victim blaming per se, but we're saying there's ways to be proactive so you're not even in that position to feel victimized or to feel excluded or to feel like you can't do anything anymore. So I think, at least for me, the first thing I noticed about the movie, I was really caught off guard about 2/3 of the way through when you find out that Jane, the protagonist, has only been working at that job for 5 weeks. So she's already slipped down this slope where she's missed her father's birthday. She's isolated socially. It looks like she's not going out with her coworkers. So it makes you wonder, is that part of her personality? Is she maybe more a little withdrawn naturally and she doesn't feel comfortable saying? What drew her to that position? She tells the HR guy she wants to be a producer. Okay, so what did she know about this firm before applying, before accepting the job? And how quickly did she see this behavior? My guess would be pretty quickly. It looks like everyone in that office knew what was going on and either turned a blind eye or accepted it or just didn't choose to say anything to stop it or left the firm. And that's why we didn't see them in the movie. So my first question in my mind was, why is she staying? So is she making a conscious decision that she was initially okay with those things because it was a means to an end and then it gradually wore on her? Or was she a little naive because of her age or inexperience and she didn't realize it till later? So that was something that got me thinking. So what did she know ahead of time? And when did she realize what was going on and that it was impacting her? Because she clearly was being affected mentally, emotionally. And looking at it and this kind of leads down to, with a toxic work environment, that doesn't mean that you don't have to do tasks that you don't like. So sometimes a leader or a boss will, maybe your personalities don't mesh. Maybe there's jobs, especially in the Marine Corps. I know like there's working parties all the time. I'm sure the other services are the same. There's things you have to do that you don't like sometimes. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a toxic work environment. And sometimes you can love your job and love the work you're doing, but it can be still a toxic work environment if the personalities are creating that. So that was kind of my first thing. I would love if anyone else wondered that about Jane, like why is she even there to begin with, kind of a thing. Or if I'm alone in that, that's fine too. But I like to ask those background questions, and that's probably from my legal experiences. What series of events and what personality interactions got us to the point that we're at right now? And could they have been avoided, or how do we move forward from them?
Right.
So did anyone else, if you feel comfortable, were you like, why is she still there? What did she even think would be good about that job? I mean, it's clearly a low level, menial task job.
And for me, as I watched it and I saw her reactions, I thought that she probably idolized and had in her mind that this was the best production company, the best place to work. And if you've normalized certain behaviors from people for years, and then you get into an environment where people are acting abusive, you may not recognize that what is going on is even abusive. And I think that's part of the problem with a toxic work environment, is that the behavior of an abusive leader is normalized by the group. So the group dynamics come in and everybody acts like that's okay for there to be somebody who's being abusive. So you become the odd man or the odd woman out if you are the one who isn't reacting in the same way that everybody else is. And that's what can make it incredibly hard to report a toxic leader, and why this is probably one of the biggest problems in a workplace environment is dealing with a toxic leader, because that toxic leader has power, and that toxic leader knows who to impress and knows how to look in front of other people when other people aren't looking, and can even sometimes endear him or herself to certain subordinates so that the person who's being abused feels gaslighted, because nobody else around them in the dynamic understands that that person is in fact toxic. And so I feel that's why this type of behavior festers, because as you can see, even in the assistant, Jane's coworkers were complicit. They were telling her how to write the emails to apologize. They were saying, oh, you could have just come to me, when the HR guy decided to blab to the whole office what she just did. So they all did things to kind of bring her in the fold. Then the boss says, oh, you're so valuable. Oh, I'd only do this because you're good, playing into her ego and letting her think that it's okay what she did. So she's not in any trouble now, even though she did what she did. So that keeps her there, kind of keeps her hanging on. So it's just, it's a cycle of abuse that continues to play out. And the movie was I felt, even for me, it was very triggering, because it brought up a lot of things that I've experienced in the past. And I don't know for all of you if you had the same thing. My situation was certainly not a boss who was sleeping with people who were coming into the office, but it was a culture of fear, and it was a culture where you couldn't speak up. Some of the workplaces that I've been in, and that behavior of abuse was normalized. So it wasn't as easy to speak up. Pending anybody else who wants to chime in, and please feel free to chime in. We saw the note there from Julie, and I see you're on camera. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, just making sure. I saw out of the assistant sort of a division between the male female role. The guys kind of did what they wanted, and then they basically dumped everything else on her, and forget her name, but she
Jane.
seemed to come to the rescue on Jane. Come to the rescue on everything, from last minute arrangements for the boss, drinks, cleaning up, all the stereotypical administrative things and beyond. But it also seemed like she was the new person. It could have been foreseen as a bit of, hazing. You do everything until you earn your place.
Earn your place. Yep, exactly.
Well,
there was no mentoring going on. There was nobody, showing her what she needed to do. At least it appeared that way. No one she could go to ask questions. The HR guy was definitely intimidating.
Not helpful at all. No.
Well, it's no worse than going to one of our simios. Like, okay, so what's your complaint? What's your complaint? But it doesn't necessarily go to the whole command. So to say. And I saw a lot of my unfortunately more recent experiences, in Jane. I'm doing a lot of last minute things for my boss, and he'll give me kudos on those, but then it'll come to something stupid, like fighting for collateral duties. Maybe our department heads get ranked on how many other people have collateral duties or how many our department holds. But it's kind of like when it came to me and I said I really needed this for, promotion. It was and I'd actually put in for the Simeo alternate. And he's like, well, I kind of had to pick and choose my battles. And it's like, you know what? I'm the most senior person here, promotion wise, unfortunately now above zone, and I haven't asked for much. I'm kind of like Jane. I'm kind of like making my own way through this command, and then you don't do the smallest little thing, that I actually asked for.
Yeah, and those are all fantastic points. I think the lack of mentorship was clear, and I think that's a great way to circle back to Teresa's initial question: what could Jane have done? I think in all situations, including this movie, we're we don't have the full context. So we have to keep that in mind. We don't know exactly what the background is. Like I said, I was shocked 2/3 through the movie when I learned she'd only been there 5 weeks. Cause in my mind, I'm like, if I'm there for 2 weeks and I realize that's what's going on, I'm out of there. I'm thinking it had been beating her down for years at this point. So I mean, that's how she kind of acted. I'm like, she's already missing her father's birthday. She's been there for 5 weeks. So this is kind of like, you know, at least in the Marine Corps, it's probably similar in the Navy. There's always this saying like, no one's going to care about your career more than you. So while no one has a right to treat you disrespectfully or to make you do, I mean, yes, there are like rank structure, and sometimes the lower ranking individuals have to do some of the, you know, crappy jobs or whatever, just like the new assistant has to do some of the cleanup stuff, you know, and she probably was fully aware of that before she accepted the job. So there's some kind of crow you got to eat sometimes, but that doesn't mean people can treat you disrespectfully. But that's also partially on you. The one scene that I thought was interesting was when she was cleaning up in the kitchen and the women came in and kind of dropped their dishes off.
Yes.
I know, Teresa, we talked about this on the phone before today. My take on it was different than yours. I know you said that you thought it looked like they assumed she would wash them.
Yes.
When I watched it, because I tried to watch it with like a clean view, like, you know, fresh.
Yeah.
And I saw it as two people who were like in a hurry and dropped their stuff, maybe to go back to it later, maybe not, we don't know. Because it's not like they handed it to her or anything. They kind of left it off to the side and she looked at it and was like, and picks it up.
Interesting.
And washes it. So that's how I saw it. And I'm like, okay, so yeah, they should have cleaned up after themselves, obviously, but I'm guilty. I'll leave dishes sometimes till later if I'm busy. I don't mean it maliciously, but that's just going to happen once in a while. So she
took it on.
Exactly. So if you want to be seen and be respected, yes, people need to treat you that way, but you also need to make yourself be the person that commands respect and that people see as, hey, they're a valuable member of our team, and they're and that's a fine line. Because then are you too assertive? Are you the troublemaker in the office? Are you always complaining? But if you continue to do those little things and don't vocalize it, people will naturally take it for granted. And it's not necessarily malicious, but that's just kind of human nature, that if things keep being done behind the scenes, no, it's out of sight, out of mind. So it's that fine balance where you need to do your job. But so transitioning more to a military side, that's why we have billet descriptions. That's why we have, for our civilians, we have the write-ups of, you know, what their job is. That's why we have specific like rank structure, command structure. We have the collateral billets. Everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing. So yes, you need to do all of the duties that you're assigned to, and that's your responsibility. But if it's not your responsibility, I mean, be polite, but people shouldn't be forcing or expecting you to do things that don't fall within your duties. And you need to make that clear in a polite, respectful way. Otherwise, it'll just
continue to happen. And we see that time and time again. It's interesting that you had a different perspective than I did, because I think I had it from this perspective. If I saw that dish, I'd be like, why are you just leaving it here? And you see, I'm sitting here cleaning. You obviously, but all she could have done is she could have even walked by and said, oh, you just left your dish there. I wasn't sure if you were going to get back to it or whatever. There was some sort of a conversation that she could have had with these ladies too, to insert herself. It's very similar to when his coworker, remember when they expect her to take the phone call from the wife? At some point, she should have spoke up to her coworkers and said, I'm not taking those calls every single time. Other people in the office need to take those calls. That's another way that she could have spoken up. And again, it's not necessarily to blame her, but it's to give you guys tools to I call the tools to fight back. because if you don't fight back, then it's going to keep happening. And so this sort of leads into the next kind of couple questions that I have, and then we're just going to start taking questions that that you guys have as well. And please feel free to speak up when you do have a question. But
and Teresa, real quick before you move on, just to kind of caveat off what you just said, you do need to speak up. Always be respectful. Always be, kind, professional, courteous, all that. But also, if you do that, you're establishing boundaries, which is healthy for everyone. But also, a lot of times your bosses will respect you more because they see that you can communicate in a professional manner. You understand what your job is. You're willing to do your job, but you also know that there's boundaries and that there's a distribution of the task that needs to be done. And you're looking out for the team. And again, as long as it's respectful and courteous and professional, but it will often build up your credibility versus just shrinking into the background and being like, oh, well, I guess I'll just do it.
Right.
So,
Absolutely. And I think that you brought up a really good point about the tact. One of the things that I would do when I was faced in an environment where I knew I was getting emotional with somebody, and I had to learn how to do this because it didn't come natural, is I would stop. And if I could sense like my heart was beating, or I could sense that I was tensing up when I was going to go talk to somebody, or they were doing the same towards me, I would say no. I would say stop. I say, look, let's just take a couple minutes out. Let's take a breather. And then sometimes I would even say, should we call in an unbiased observer, somebody who doesn't love me, someone who doesn't love you, but somebody who is, has no skin in the game, who can sit through this conversation. And sometimes I would just do that, have someone else sit in if I was having a very, very difficult conversation, just because and it wasn't because I was trying to cover my butt. It was because I didn't want things to get to a point where it was going to devolve into, name calling or something emotional. So I had to learn all of those habits. Sometimes we're not raised with the best relating skills. But I think a lot of that can just go a long way with, like what you said, with the tact and the respectfulness and the professionalism. So,
absolutely.
and yeah, Julie, I agree about, she said, I'm all for being respectful and tactful at the same time, document the situation in a notebook or calendar. I agree. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. You have to sometimes keep a record of everything, but the unbiased observer is I will tell you, or having somebody always in the CC line, sometimes, unfortunately, you may work with people that you don't know if you can 100% trust, but you still have to work with them, and you still have to play well with them, and they're still on your team and you're still on their team. And even if you don't trust them or like them, they're still part of the team. And so that is where you may have to document things. You may have to put somebody in the CC line, and you never allow yourself to get emotional, especially if you're the senior person. And I've learned that lesson the hard way as well. So those are some of the ways that have helped me, that I hope can help you guys. And I think, and like we said, the first step that you suggest people take when they're enduring a toxic leader, when you know someone's being abusive towards you, Candace, what would you say is kind of the first step?
I think in my opinion, is that kind of self-reflection. So, and that's why I started this kind of conversation with what did you, what was your takeaway? Why was she there, kind of a thing? Because as you just said, like, we're all on the same team, we're all going to work together. And there's a huge difference between a toxic leader or a toxic work environment, and then personality conflicts. So I think that's the first thing, is when you think you are in a, or maybe you just don't like your job. I mean, not everyone gets to choose their MOS, or maybe you're in a billet you don't like, or you're in a location you don't like. So I think if you feel like that's going on, the very first step, as hard as it is to self-reflect. What is it about this situation that's making me feel prejudiced against, or what is making me feel like I don't want to go to work? And you have to ask yourself those hard questions first, because one, sometimes it will resolve the issue. And two, if it's not, because it is something external to yourself, you need to have that unbiased, like, very real perspective, so that you can then take those follow-on steps. And we will talk about later some follow-on steps that you can take from either the legal or administrative side.
Sure.
But it should be always an escalation of force. So the first thing is, what is it about this person or this command climate that I don't like, or that isn't working for me, or is impacting me mentally or emotionally?
And absolutely, this kind of, and I don't mean to cut you off, but really quick, I just got inspired by this. Also goes into the triggers. So a lot of times when somebody is affecting us a certain way and we're feeling it, like with me, I'll get the fight or flight, and then I'll start to tense up. And it isn't until I'm able to reflect later and I have some mental space that I realize that this is probably a situation I've dealt with before. This is somebody who is reminding me of somebody from my childhood. And I'm playing out a dynamic that I've had in my past. And it's affecting me on this visceral level because it's something that maybe I haven't moved past. And it also could at the same time be something external. So sometimes it's even both. I'm reacting viscerally to the situation, but at the same time, this person is being abusive. So you're absolutely right. It's that first thing when you're trying to figure that out. And then I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but that just, I mean, what you said just really spoke to me there.
No, that's exactly on point. And Julie, to answer your question, I think that is when that's going to be the next escalation. So that's a great segue. So if it is a personality conflict, hopefully it's not you and your direct supervisor, but sometimes it is. That's when you get another person involved, I think. Hopefully someone who is unbiased, who can kind of mediate. So is it a leadership style? Is it a disagreement on whose job is what? And maybe, that creates some tension, or what is it that's impacting the workplace? And how do you resolve that? So a lot of times, if you have a peer or maybe the next level supervisor that can talk and hash it out. I mean, I'm 100% in favor of like the lowest amount of, like, as much as I'm an attorney and I love litigation, I avoid litigation at all costs. Most things can be resolved out of a courtroom or out of an investigation or out of that, but you need to talk, and you need to be willing to talk, and you need to be willing to hear the other person's side of the story. Because who knows, maybe that other person also has some kind of triggering history in their past, and they see something that you're doing that is
triggering to them.
Is triggering to them. So you always need to come into something with an open mind and a willingness to communicate, because I'm very convinced that most things, and as jaded as I am, I'm still optimistic that the people that join the military are generally good people. They want to serve their country. They're willing to be on a team. They're team players. So I think you can find that commonality and you can work it out. And, if worst case scenario, sometimes the command will just move someone's shop. Hey, you're used to be in the S1, now you're in the S4. Hey, you used to be in this, now you're in this. Sometimes that's just what it boils down to. But I really think that if you engage that person and you have that very, frank but professional conversation with them, hey, this is what your actions or your words are doing to me. Am I doing something?
Making me feel, or have
am I doing something to you? Like, where is that disconnect? And I think that's the first step. So if that's the case, because it is just a personality thing. And I'm sure we all had like that kid in grammar school who we didn't get along with at all. And then we realized it's because like they were jealous or you were jealous, and then suddenly you became best friends. That can happen in adulthood too. Maybe you guys just are not realizing that you can get along and it's creating this tension, or you have very similar personalities. So you need to accommodate for that.
Right.
So talking to the person, and then if need be, get the next level leadership involved to kind of mediate and see, hey, how can we work better together as a team? Let's focus on mission accomplishment and what do we need to do to get there?
Right.
And if that's still not possible, maybe that's a request. Hey, can I move shops? Or, hey, can I like work the other shift and they work the other shift? Especially in the military, there's so many movements all the time. It's a lot easier than say like in the assistant where there's 3 desks, no one's moving anywhere. In the Marine Corps, if I really needed to, I could probably move to a whole different building and still do my job. So that's not ideal. And like running away or trying to avoid the problem is not the best solution, but it is an option if it comes down to that.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes too, if you don't deal with some of the issues you're having with coworkers, you'll notice that the same kinds of issues will continue to prop themselves up, because the same kind of people will trigger you if you haven't gotten into why this type of personality or these people are affecting you, or are digging at you the way that they are. And then I think the
Yeah.
second thing that point that I want to make is, it always helps, no matter who the person is that you're having the problem with, have some empathy for them. So
Hmm.
see it from their point of view. You may not like 95% of the things that they do, but find that 5% of common ground that you have with that person. And that will go a long way,
Hmm.
because
Exactly.
it really shows that you are able to step outside of yourself and see things from somebody else's point of view. And it will teach you a lot about yourself, because you're going to get to see some of the parts of yourself that you may not like so much. But if you can recognize those things, I think it really helps strengthen your leadership. So that was one thing that I tried also to employ when I was in these situations. But because
Yeah.
by no means is any of this easy, and I think that and then the other point to this, eh, from the de-escalation standpoint, and you mentioned this when we were talking earlier, is that sometimes the person may not even know. If you
Right.
don't say something or speak up and just hold on to that resentment until you go and complain outside of that person, because you haven't taken the time to pull them aside and just try to, as politely and respectfully as possible, hash out the
Hmm.
problem, you're missing out on an opportunity to help that person grow and point out
Yes.
something that they may not even be aware that they're doing.
Yes, and I'll make one quick point, and then I actually have an example that goes perfectly with that. So, with the empathy, communication and empathy, it might not fix the environment. It might not make a toxic command climate suddenly like the best command you've ever been in, but it could take it from a toxic work environment to a neutral, or to even like a tolerable. So you gotta think, like, what is the toxicity? So we've all had, like I said, we've all had jobs we don't like, we've all worked with people we don't like, but that's not toxic. There's something else that makes it toxic. So if you can at least get the toxicity out, then you can start building and improving whatever that relationship is, or whatever that work environment is. So that's the biggest thing, is taking it from a toxic level to maybe like an I don't like this job level, or
Right.
something like that.
Right.
And the perfect example that I've been very fortunate. I've had fantastic bosses and leaders. But again, I think that goes both ways, because I've also had, some people might disagree. They might say my bosses weren't that great, because they definitely like ran me into the ground work wise. But I like that kind of a pace and workload, so I thrive off of it. So I think it went both ways. They treated me extremely respectfully. They let me have a lot of autonomy, even at a junior rank. But in return, I put out for them, and their reputation increased because the shop results were improving and getting better. So it is a give take relationship. But one example I did have was when I was a prosecutor, a judge in the Navy Marine Corps. He was a very prominent judge, extremely talented and intelligent. One of my mentors, phenomenal person. But he was very, very traditional in certain ways, which could be maybe seen as sexist. And, he would make comments sometimes, even in court, that were very sexist, in my opinion, such as like telling my direct supervisor, I first lieutenant at the time, my boss was a major and he was a lieutenant colonel, and he told my major boss, "Oh, you got the best seat in the house," because he was sitting next to me. Little comments like that, where I'm just like, it's just not right. So finally I'm like, I know him. I know he's an intelligent, kind, generous person. It's weird that he's saying these types of things. So I finally went up to him one day, and mind you, I'm an 02. He is an 05. And I went up to him one day after one of those types of encounters, and I, sir, can I speak to you privately? Of course, yes. What would you like to talk about? And I just point blank to him, I was like, sir, I really feel like some of the comments that you make are sexist and they're embarrassing to me. He was shocked, literally shocked. And he asked for a couple examples when I gave them to him, and he hit, like, his mind was blown. Literally, like, the head blowing up emoji was like happening in real time. He had no idea, because in his upbringing, and I mean, he was like, he's now long retired, but he was he'd been passed for colonel just because RMOS and all that kind of stuff. Like, he was, quite seasoned.
Wow.
And he had no idea, because one, he really didn't work with females too much. He had very traditional upbringings. He, was raised and lived, his wife was very traditional role. But he had no idea. And he at first got a little flustered and like, I thought he was going to get mad at me. And he was like, I'm so sorry. He's like, I had no idea. He's like, I'm really impressed that you told me this, because no one has ever said this to me before. Never again did I hear anything. I mean, I'll admit the next couple of weeks were a little awkward between us, because I think he was ultra aware of how the things he was saying were being perceived. And he was almost a little cold to me at first, because I think he was overcorrecting.
Uncomfortable. I mean, it sucks to be called out.
Yes. And I think he was overcorrecting a little bit. And I'm like, man, I just freaking, ruined my relationship with this awesome judge. Within a couple weeks, I kept being respectful to him. I kept, having good conversations. I would request to have more like kind of sidebars with him to let him know, hey, I'm still comfortable talking to you. And long story short, within a few weeks or a few months, it had gotten back to the good natured relationship, but no comments ever again. And I still remain in contact with him now. And like I said, he's been retired for quite some time. So and that's like a best case scenario. So again, I'm very fortunate that was my experience, because it could have gone very differently and very badly for me. But that goes to say, one, people will generally respect you if you you're helping them. I mean, no one wants to be, not no one, but most people don't want to be like the sexist jerk or, the chauvinistic. I know we saw like the narcissistic leader, Lieutenant Commander Dominguez brought that up. I think generally speaking, no one wants to be that, maybe they do because they want the results. But if you are respectful and let them know, hey, this is how it's perceived, it might be uncomfortable for a little bit, but you need to just kind of suffer through the uncomfortability and let the ship correct itself, and be patient and be understanding too. Because again, just like things might trigger you from your past life, things might trigger other people that's different, or they might not know. Like, I hate to say this, especially in the military, there's a lot of very senior officers and enlisted who grew up in a completely different era, basically, than some of our more junior sailors and Marines. And I'm not excusing that behavior, but if they grew up hearing, if they lived in some small town somewhere where women didn't have jobs and they only stayed home to like watch the kids, and that's all they know, that's a hard transition for them to now maybe have a female boss who is higher ranking than them and telling them what to do, or, so I think being aware that not everyone has the same life experience as you, and assuming the best until engaging them in that conversation, letting them know politely, respectfully, and not in public. Like, don't be that person that calls someone out in public, but take them off to the side and say, hey, peer to peer, or, Marine to Marine, or sailor to sailor, or sailor to Marine, I just want to let you know this is how you're being perceived. I want to help you, because then they're not feeling attacked either.
Right. And I would to tag on to what Candace is saying, and to answer your question, Lieutenant Commander Dominguez, I feel that narcissism is a spectrum, and I feel that everybody has some narcissism in them.
Oh, yeah.
Because everybody likes to feel validated and likes to have people recognizing them and seeing them. And somebody who's overly narcissist, I always think about that's a person that probably wasn't seen a lot growing up. And so now they overcompensate to be seen through accomplishments. Sometimes that's one of the ways in which somebody, I think, tries to be validated and be seen. And so even with somebody that you perceive as narcissist, I would still argue that there are ways of finding an empathetic approach with that person and seeing where there may be common ground with them. They could be the most despicable person, but I guarantee that there's something somewhere along those lines that you can find as a common ground. And I think what Candace said about examples. So you pull this leader aside, and if you need to do it with an unbiased observer, you arrange for an unbiased observer if that's what you need to do and you feel most comfortable doing. But you go in there with examples. She went in there and she spoke to him and said, this is what you said. This is how it made me feel. Here are some examples of, and just very factual. And you just lay it out there and then have a dialogue about that. If you don't, then yes, you may have to elevate it. Now, this goes back into handling it at the lowest level and then now taking it to the higher level, because sometimes you'll deal with somebody where you've done all that. You've had the one-on-one conversation and the behavior continues to happen. You've came back and said something again the second time and said, you're still doing such and such, and I'm still feeling such and such. And they just completely dismiss you. And then they continue to treat you abusively, no matter what. And unlike the assistant, we can't always walk away. We can wait out a bad boss for a couple years or 3 years. But I always feel like if we do that, we're just passing that problem boss on to somebody else. So somebody else now has to deal with that abusive leader because you didn't have the ability to do the steps that were needed to call this person out. I mean, I can tell you that I've been told that I've been abusive in the past, and I will be very frank about that. And I didn't know that that's how I was being, but I was frustrated. I was my tone was not necessarily as kind as it could have been, and people took offense to it. And because I'm a very direct person. Once it was brought to my attention, I learned how to soften my voice. I learned how to talk with a smile. I don't want to say I learned how to be nicer, but I did. I did learn how to be kinder in how I was treating people, because people were taking offense by my tone. And I think that's something serious that you have to be able to do. And if nobody had said something to me, I probably would have gone on and then done the same thing to somebody else. So you have to say something, as hard as that is. Now, when you've said something and the behavior doesn't change, Candace, then what are some of the steps?
Yeah. So, and this kind of goes with the boss and the assistant. Not only was he a narcissist, he was clearly an egomaniac. I mean, he was like totally ignorant of all the things going on, but no one was doing anything. And in that situation, everybody was kind of perpetuating this, don't ask, don't tell type of situation. Even the HR guy was in on it. He was kind of ripping up complaints. Hey, I'm writing this on a legal pad. But do you really want me to file it? So I think the problem there was no one took the little steps again. So it snowballed and snowballed and snowballed. I think if people were playing into his narcissism and also to his ego, and why would he stop it? He has no incentive to stop it. But I think that and I wrote down how you present yourself matters. So when you take those little steps first, and I hate to say this, but the reality is with females, we do have to watch our voice and our tone a lot more than men do. Yes. It is true.
Yes.
And I learned this lesson in law school of all places. We tend to sound like we're shrieking or like we're whining when we get, heightened emotion. When men get, you know, charged up, they're fiery and
Yes,
they're
and strong.
verbose, and you know, we're like
Yes.
whining and like bitching,
Or
you know,
mean.
like, so you need to be aware of that.
You do.
And it's only going to help you get your point across. So if
Right.
and I had to practice this, to be honest with you, for court, because I'm often the only female in the courtroom. My client is a man, you know, the judge is a man, the jury, the panel's all men. So, and a lot of those men don't think I belong there. So I have to prove them wrong and get them to agree with me. So, and that's not an easy job.
No.
So that is when you need to know that how you present yourself matters. So that circles back to know your facts, have that self-reflection, so you know what is my actual issue here? Is it valid? Have I done something myself to try to fix it? Have I talked to that individual to try to fix it? And if it's now escalating, okay, I need to raise this to a higher level, but do I have all my ducks in a row? Do I have all my facts? Can I tell them these are the steps that I proactively took to try to fix this? And I know this sounds like, oh, this is so much work on the person who's being abused or whatever. Well, but sometimes that's what it takes. And at the end of the day, you're going to look like the more professional person because you are being proactive. You're taking steps to fix it. You're going to be bringing it to the leader's attention with facts and data instead of emotion and complaints. And especially if you have the performance to back it up, you're only building your own credibility. So
Yes.
like with that judge, I came to him in a polite, respectful manner, and he knew my performance. And I continued that performance after I, you know, called him out. It's not like I was trying to create a more hostile environment. I was trying to fix it. And he saw that and he was uncomfortable, but then it corrected itself. So you need to present yourself appropriately. You need to take it to that next highest level. And I think that the very next step to answer your question is, if possible, and again, this is all, you know, every situation is different, especially depending on who the contributors to the toxicity are. But assuming it's someone at like a low leadership level, if you can't fix it at that level, you need to go to the next higher person. So if you're comfortable, go direct to them. Ideally, I know Teresa, we talked about this. Ideally, there's someone who's your peer or slightly senior to you that is a neutral person that you feel comfortable with, that can be kind of not an ally because you're not teaming up against the person, but someone who can kind of, you know, segue to that person. So you're not I mean, because that's not a good look, to be frank, when like an E3 is going direct to the 04 major XO to complain about the staff sergeant, you know, whatever. So you should still respect a chain of command. I mean, sometimes it's not possible, but if it's possible, work your way up those levels or get an intermediary who can take your complaints up. Because most commanders want to know when these issues are happening, because guess who's getting fired if there's a poor command climate survey? It's not the company commander, most likely, it's the battalion commander, it's the 06 commander. So they generally want to fix this. And also we have, I'm sure the Navy has these, the command climate surveys. They exist for a reason. So be honest.
Right.
If there are issues in the command, be honest, put them in there. Don't like list out every little thing you hate. Like, I don't like PTing on Tuesday mornings. Like, nobody cares about that. Like that, and you're losing credibility. But if it's like, hey, you know, my shop staff NCO makes all the female Marines PT in shorts, but the men can wear like whatever they want and it's uncomfortable. And like, that's something that's valid. You bring that up. So identifying real issues. Yeah, John.
One question. So in other words, you consider a strategic or a critical skill set being your own advocate and advocate for others.
Yes. And I think this was when the conversation first started. You weren't in yet.
Right, I'm sorry.
Also for other people that joined a little late. In the Marine Corps, we have a saying, same in the Navy, no one cares about your career more than you. So just like you have to advocate for yourself for those key billets to get promotion or for the duty stations that are good for your family, you also need to advocate for a proper and healthy command climate. Because otherwise you're going to suffer, your fellow sailors and Marines are going to suffer, and future people are going to suffer. Because like Teresa said, you're just passing the buck off. And here's the problem too, and this is exactly what happened with the assistant. No one spoke up, but they kept doing the output. So from the boss's eyes, who we never even saw him, but
Right.
From his perspective, he comes in, the office is running smoothly, the work's getting done, no one's complaining, and he's making money. So where's the problem? So that's why I'm saying, if you're going to make a complaint, you need to back it up with results. But also, if there's an issue, don't just give the results and act like there's not a problem. They go together. In theory, a healthy working environment creates healthy, productive results. A poor working environment normally shows negative results or a negative impact on productivity or mission accomplishment. But if you're going out of your way to make the results in a negative environment, how is the boss or
How's the
anyone
boss ever going to be fixed?
gonna know?
Yeah.
How are
Yeah.
they going to know? So I'm not saying tank at your job because you don't like it or it's toxic, but you need to say like, hey, here's my work performance, here's what I'm doing, but it could be this if the environment was like this.
Right.
Or, hey, it's good right now, but if this continues, I see it slipping.
Yep.
Because nobody wants that. Nobody wants more work. Nobody wants their job to be harder. And the CO certainly doesn't want to get fired.
Right.
So it needs to,
Right.
it needs to be
And
related.
Right. And also too, like, remember that scene in HR where he's the guy saying, well, 400 people wanted that same job, but you managed to get it. When I started off as an ensign, I was told surface warfare eats its young. There was this attitude that, your superiors had a rough time getting up, rising through the ranks, and so shall you. If they got by with 2 hours of sleep a day, so shall you. And there was nothing. I guess a lot of it, because when I was on active duty, it was before the command climate surveys and stuff like that. There was this attitude that, okay, I had it rough, so and now you got to suck. Now it's your turn to suck it up. And I saw a lot of that in that movie, and I think a lot of us have seen that at one point or another.
And
that's sort of like one thing that we need to change.
Absolutely.
We do.
And that's why it does come back to that personal responsibility and self-reflection. And Teresa and I spoke about this earlier. By the end of the movie, Jane, the protagonist, is also contributing to the negative work environment, because that new girl, and I forget her name, the one from Idaho, she comes in, the one that Jane is reporting that he took her to the hotel and all this. My viewpoint of her, let's call her Sarah. Sarah was young and naive and probably didn't know what was going on. She certainly seemed friendly and kind, and she actually was trying to make conversation with Jane. The whole office is quiet and the guys are kind of weird. And Sarah was like, oh, do I do this, do that? And Jane
trying to be
was
friendly.
Like, Jane was very cold,
Dismissive.
very cold.
Yep.
And she's like, and then finally she's like, well, these are these numbers, and here, read this binder.
And you can go home.
Yeah,
and just like shoot her out of there. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Jane, if your job is so hard and you're overworked, have her stay and help you do those dishes and turn off the lights and do these things. Like, you can't claim to be the victim if you are not taking steps to prevent it. Like, at that point, Jane was doing it to herself.
Yep.
Jane was, I will let myself be abused and taken advantage of, and I'm also going to be mean and catty to the new girl.
Yep.
So this comes, and like, especially with us, like as female leaders, which is the whole purpose of this group. Yeah, we probably had it rough. Yeah, I'm sure everyone in this group at some point was treated kind of poorly, or maybe very poorly, because their male counterparts didn't like them there, or felt intimidated, or they were the only woman, so I know my first job, I felt so excluded because the guys would have like coworkers nights
Yep.
out and wouldn't invite me.
Oh yeah,
And I
that was
called
pretty triggering in the movie when I saw that. When I saw how the guys just kind of had their little secret squirrel conversations
Yeah.
over here. I mean, I can tell you, even as a department head on a aircraft carrier, I was the only female, and it was a bunch of middle-aged dudes, all married. I was single when I first got there, and oh my God, I had no place, and felt like I just didn't have a friend in the world or anyone to talk to. And that was, where I really got my butt handed to me. And I didn't have that friend. I didn't have that ally and I regret that. There was a couple of the guys that were really good to me. Few of them weren't. The ringleader wasn't, which made it very hard. And, I really wish that I had reached out, or I had someone that I could talk to. But yeah, it is very difficult. And we're not, that's the thing here. We're trying to also give that fine line between victim and empowerment, because we understand that sometimes you're going to feel empowered and you're going to be able to do something about it. And sometimes you really are the victim. But at the same time, you can only control what you can control. And I think that one of the reasons why SSLA exists is to give women tools for empowerment and tools to fight back, and ways in which we can find our voice and be our best self and do our job well. And that's what Candace is giving us today, which I greatly appreciate, because I think that there really isn't a lot of resources that exist to say what you can do. There's a lot out there there's a lot of media stories of people who, like today in military.com, there was a story on some women who felt discriminated against because they wanted to have children. We don't, and this is the thing, and I don't know those stories at all, but we also don't know the full story. It's very important when you read anything in the media that they're looking for clickbait. They're looking for headlines. And we don't know all the particulars and all the details on either of those two case studies. So that's something else to keep in mind as we read these stories and we navigate these problems.
Yeah, and also something to keep in mind is, just like you might have coworkers who will ally with you, sometimes they won't. Women don't own a monopoly on like victimhood or toxicity, or, you have to keep in mind your male coworkers might be as uncomfortable with some of the stuff going on that you are. So they're your peer at the end of the day. And I personally, this is my Candace personal opinion. This is not SSLA opinion, but my personal opinion is I'm not a female Marine. I'm just a Marine. Like, if something's impacting me negatively, I want to make sure it's also not impacting anyone else negatively, regardless of gender or rank or anything. So if something is impacting me negatively, I'm going to assume it probably is someone else. I'm not going to be like, oh, this is only an issue for the females, or this is only an issue for the lawyers, or this is only an issue for someone. We're big picture, the services are each a microcosm. So any toxicity is going to spread if not ended.
If not checked. Yep.
Yes. So you need to think of it like that. And oftentimes, maybe if you're the stronger person, someone will join you. Like, there was one part of that movie where the guys did seem kind of, sympathetic to what was happening to her.
A facility that all of a sudden
I think we got somebody's.
in the middle of the day.
Hold on a second. Can everybody mute their phones, or there's some background?
Just disintegrated.
John, I think that might be on your end.
And that was disturbing about it.
Oh,
How's that?
here. Yep, got it. Okay, go ahead, Candace.
So instead of like, when there was that kind of showing from them of some empathy and some sympathy, she could have latched onto that and been like, hey, let's, work together, let's team up. Or when, the new girl, Sarah, when like, hey, let's take a stand and make this, like, have some better boundaries. And like, if because maybe alone you're not comfortable doing that, but with another person you might be. So you need to recognize that not everyone's out to get you. You can ask for help, you can ask for allies, and it might also be affecting them just as much as you, but you can't be or perpetuate the problem. That's the big thing. And I was shocked by how Jane treated Sarah, like as if it was Sarah's fault that this creepy old guy wanted to get in her pants.
Right.
Like, how is that Sarah's fault?
Exactly. No, agree. And we're getting to the top of the hour. Does anybody have any parting thoughts or last questions? Want to turn it over to you guys before we end the call, but also mindful of everybody's time.
And I will say right before we leave, I'm gonna just give you a list of some like actual actions you can do if it gets to that. So if that's your question, we'll get to that, but anything else that you guys want to talk about first?
Okay, back over to you, Candace.
So obviously we talked about the escalation of force starting at the lowest level. Let's say you get to your commanding officer and it's, you know, it's not gonna get better. You're like, okay, I've tried the escalation of force. I've engaged my senior leadership. I've engaged the middle management. Now I'm at like the senior management level. So what can you actually do? So there's actually quite a few resources. One we already mentioned, command climate surveys. So those things have a massive impact. So be honest and be fair. So if there's criticisms, put them in there. If there's pros, put them in there. But that can go a long way to help because the commander gets those results. They're anonymous. But a lot of times, and I've seen this from the legal side, commands will initiate investigations based on what they see in the feedback from a command climate survey. So there's literally things brought to their attention anonymously that they look into because of that. So that's an option for you. Speaking to someone outside the chain of command. So this is cliche, but your chaplain. Chaplains are always there to assist. And the great thing about a chaplain is it's 100% confidential. They can't tell the command or anyone else what you said unless you authorize them to. So the chaplain is, at least the ones I've worked with in the past, they're pretty experienced. They know everybody. And they can usually give you that candid advice like, hey, maybe this isn't that thing that you think it is, or maybe this is, or hey, here's who you should talk to for that. So they're a significantly untapped resource. It might also be that you just need to talk to someone about what's triggering you. So that's, you know, you might have unresolved things, or you might realize that the other person has unresolved things. So sometimes just talking it out with another person can make a huge improvement in the situation. If it's something like, I know this was brought up, I think Julie, you might have said it, that if you're being kind of targeted as hostile because you're calling someone out or something like that, legal assistance attorneys and also defense counsel are always available. Defense counsel and legal assistance attorneys are both pretty limited in their scope of what they can do. There's certain triggers that allow them to represent you or to give you advice, but it doesn't hurt to go see someone. So I would recommend starting with legal assistance because that's a non-criminal, non-punitive area, but most bases have a legal assistance office. You can make an appointment, you could talk to someone, and they can help you with resources, with guidance, or putting you in touch with the right people. Or sometimes they can even help you like draft a letter to the command or something like that. So legal assistance, if it gets to the point where you're being targeted, such as like you're now the subject of an investigation because you called someone out, go to a defense counsel. Again, they might not be detailed to you. They might not become your detailed attorney, but they can at least point you in the right direction, and they know the resources. They know like the MAR admins, they know the all-navs, they know all that stuff, and they can say, hey, you know, that's not authorized, and here is the reason why, here's the source, and now you're equipped to go to the command and say, hey, remember that thing that I thought was an issue and you said it wasn't? It is an issue. Here is the documentation from the Department of the Navy that says it is. So that's another resource. Other leadership, again, if you maybe have a mentor from a prior command, this isn't really one I typically recommend because it looks like you're, you know, not keeping things, you know, within the house. But if you have a prior leader or a prior mentor that you can talk to, because you don't trust anyone in your chain of command, that person, you know, it's such a small community, everyone knows everybody, they might be able to be that kind of informal go-between, like, oh, hey, I know that CO. Are you sure that's what's going on? Let me talk to them. So that is a possibility. Request masks. If, you know, every Marine and sailor has the right to talk directly to their CO or even their CG. So I sit in on request masks with our commanding general all the time. Again, ideally, you would resolve it at a lower level, but if it's not happening, you can go to a 1-star. You can bring these things to their attention in request mass, but you better believe you better have your facts and your ducks in a row, because it will be in writing, it will be a formal record, and it will get investigated. But that's absolutely a thing that you can do, and it's your right to be able to do that. The last two, so IG, the Inspector General, everyone, all units have them. You can go to the one for your unit, or if it's something that, again, you feel like your unit is all implicated, the Navy, the Department of Navy has their like headquarters IG, the Marine Corps has their headquarters IG, and you can also do an anonymous tip on their hotline. Ideally, it's not an anonymous tip because they're going to need follow-on information and all that. But that's another option, is filing an IG complaint, because that will get investigated. And then the last thing is, and this is kind of like a more, you know, nuclear option, but Article 138 complaints. So Article 138 of the UCMJ, every Marine and sailor has a right to make a complaint against their commanding officer. So if it has gone to the point, and that goes up to the flag officer. So if you've tried every venue and your staff NCOs and your low like command company command level leadership are not responsive, and your 06 is like part of the problem, you can file an Article 138 complaint to the flag officer to look into what's going on, and potentially, you know, provide some kind of redress for whatever's going on. So there's quite a few venues that you can take. And if it gets to one of those levels, like IG or Article 138, that's again when you want to talk to either a legal assistance attorney or a defense attorney, because they can make sure that it is the appropriate venue, you know, not trying to chill anybody from doing it, but to make sure, hey, this is the way to go, or this is not the way to go, and this is what information needs to be present in that thing. And then one last one I forgot to mention, along with chaplain and attorney, is your EO rep. So every unit has an EO rep. It's typically a collateral duty, but especially now with the new PAC order, there's so much that is targeted about preventing hostility from discrimination, prejudices, all those things. So talk to your EO rep, and they'll tell you, hey, this meets criteria, this doesn't meet criteria. Like, we'll do a complaint, it'll get investigated. Like, they know all those things. And if nothing else, they're a sounding board to tell you if it is actually a hostile work environment, or if maybe this is something that needs to be worked out between personalities or individuals.
Wow. Thank you. I did not know that there was that many. You've probably named about 6 things that people can do besides just handle it on the lowest level and work it out. And I really appreciate that. I'll tell you, every time I've been in this situation, I didn't know anything other than going to the CMEO. That's the only option I knew about. So this has been incredibly helpful to navigate this situation. Thank you so much, Candace. I learned a lot just this past hour, and I hope all of you did as well. This is probably one of the hardest things that we have to deal with, I think, in the military on a day-to-day basis. And once you can master this, I feel like you can master anything. So thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. If you have any follow-up questions for myself and Candace, please feel free to write any of our board members, and they'll get those out to you. I'm not Corinne Powers, that's our VP. I'm Teresa Carpenter, and this is Candace. But we'll be happy to answer any follow-on or any other questions that you guys have. But enjoy your Sunday evening. We hope this was insightful, and best of luck in your future careers and in all that you do. All right. Take care now. All right.
Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.